Welcome to Painting by Letters. My name is Hannes, and today I want to talk about test models. I've been thinking a lot lately about planning paint schemes and how we should prepare ourselves for a big project. The issue I've had up until this point is I often just crack on, excited to be painting, and move to paint from the selections I've got. There's no plan, there's no real decisions, it's just go time. I would like, however, to emulate painters who do plan paint schemes and work from briefs. So I need to begin to think about how to do this. The issue that comes, obviously, is that Warhammer is not cheap. If I buy a Necron, you better believe I'm painting it for my army. I bought a box of Immortals for future videos, and those cost over 20 quid. And you know, that's about normal for this stuff, I should expect it, but it adds up quick. Each one of these 5 Immortals to flesh out my unit will cost me £4.95. That's near enough a fiver. I could go and buy a pint for that at a decent bar. Look, I live in the north, not London, so that might not be true for all, I'll admit. But I work in a decent profession, but even then I have to reckon with how expensive this is. I do wish to point out, as Arbiter Ian has in a recent video that's actually really good, that it is actually about normal for a hobby, and this really isn't as bad as my other hobbies, but it still ain't cheap. So what do I need? I need a model to test paint schemes with. It needs to be something I'm not going to miss in my army or something that I won't want to, in the future, add to an army. It really has to be something with a variation of textures and looks, so it can be quickly turned into what I need or to emulate something. There's also something I would like to do as well, if I'm honest. I'd like to try some paint styles. You hear a lot about slap chop and things like that, army painting styles. So I want to see if there's the possibility to explore that as well, as they're sets of styles I've just never really done. It's worth saying that Games Workshop sells the perfect items for this. Or should I say the 2 perfect sets. Thus today, we're going to tackle some of my more impulsive, and if we're really honest with ourselves, stupid purchases. To vaguely defend myself, well, really to incriminate myself, I will admit that although I have a Warhammer Plus subscription, I think I've watched a grand total of about 5 minutes of it, and really, I don't know why I've got the subscription, but I do, so I bought the models. So I got myself a coffee and sat down to look at these models. It feels like they're a very good choice for the purpose I've got. There's a lot of detail and different textures within them. I picked out my tools, and you'll see me here looking at a Swan Morton knife. I used these, although made of metal, when I was a teenager, and they're just so ludicrously sharp. And I was recently watching Pete the Wargamer and saw him using one as well. So I thought I'd buy the cheapest set on Amazon as a bit of a test. These are single use, although for our purposes probably not, as they're kind of surgical blades, so they wouldn't be single use for us, but I just wanted to experiment with them. I cracked open the Chaos Space Marine first. This would be the most complex, if you can really call it that, model of this video. I leave things on sprue until I've built the previous step when I work, so you can see me here taking different parts off and slowly beginning the process of cleaning the mould lines. The knife I'm using is quite bendy, and this worked really well for the mould line cleaning process. The knife stops me putting too much pressure onto the model and damaging the main details that it has. Also, because it's just so unbelievably sharp, it can be used to tackle elements where there's plastic residue or any gates that need to be trimmed down. I think after about 5 minutes using this brand again, I had decided that it was time to pick up more. For now, I'll be using these disposable ones as they come in a pack of 10, but when they're all blunt, I will be moving towards a metal handle once more and interchangeable blades. I'm also using the Revel plastic glue. I think Citadel make a dropper similar to this now, with the metal pin. I actually really don't like this, however. I remember when I was first in the hobby, a friend of mine had this brand, and I always thought it was really cool that they could place the glue exactly where they need it, but that needle just jams so often. So to be honest, I'm less happy with that. I'm going to keep using it until I run out of the stuff, but I'll probably never buy this brand again. The glue is a traditional plastic glue, meaning it will melt the plastic and chemically bond the two. It's obviously the standard method, but it does cause issues as we cannot consider a different pose in future. As this model is monopose, as it gets however, I'm perfectly happy locking the sucker into place. I've never actually built a Chaos model before. I've bought several of them and I really enjoy the aesthetic, but I've never really built any of them. I remember when I got into Space Wolves in 5th edition, there was a White Dwarf article about Space Wolves versus Chaos Demons, and their multivariate designs always fascinated me. You know, when you're a kid and you've got the one magazine that you can afford for several months, those pages were just flipped through all the time. And I was staring across the bow of these cool designs and models and never really had the money to buy any. Probably a blessing, as these look very hard to paint. But it's still cool to have some now built. Not my 1,000 Suns in boxes and boxes and boxes, but they're there for when I get to them in future, which I'm sure I will. I just thought I'd show you the finished article here off base. He's a really cool piece, but admittedly he's got a lot going on. I suspect he'd make a really fun project for someone who wanted a bit of a challenge. I however want the detail for testing schemes, and this is perfect for my needs. I glued him down to the base and left him to cure as the glue dries from that point on. You'll notice that I'm not basing these guys either. Since it's a set of test models, I don't see the need. The decision will be on the colour of the base, not its textual properties. Now we open Miblor Darkfang? I guess that's how you say it. This model comes with some little minions as well, and I think that's really cool. The rumour I've heard, not sure if it's true, that this set was supposed to be a gang for one of the smaller games GW does. I've not played Underworld at all, but I do like the aesthetic, so might have to consider it in future. The main model has a great design, and I really like how it contrasts the Space Marine a lot in size and texture and look. However, it must be said that the leg joint this model has is not ideal. Although easy to work into place, it does take some leaning against another element to keep it in the right orientation. Thus I would recommend, if you're trying to build the same model, you consider something to prop it against when you build it. I've also got to say the mould lines on this sprue were pretty horrific. Although it was a great test model for the knives, it was a lot of cleaning. Some of the smaller models hide it very well, particularly with the way that their design seems to line up with the mould line very well. But the larger one reveals a lot of problems with that flowing skirt cape thing they have. The issue, however, really was that star that sits above their head. This was nightmarish to clean of issues, and I've actually cut the video down quite a lot because it took quite a while to do. It was really when it was getting stuck down, however, that the leg orientation settled. Quite simple on parts, but it really required some work to clean that I would not have expected from a limited run model, as it's usually younger models that are often easier to clean and models that have been in rotation for a long time that have issues like this. So be careful if you're thinking about buying this. So I have decided, for some unbeknown reason, that one of these models will be called Tabitha. Not sure which yet. Think when I thought of the name it was just the Space Marine that I owned, so maybe this wizard needs a different name. However, that model has quite a feminine form and design, which is cool to see. So I'm thinking this model is Tabitha and we need a new name for the Space Marine. I refuse to use the silly GW names, so I'm thinking Tabitha and Bob. Haven't decided yet. Anywho, The smaller guys are dead cute. I have another thing planned for these models in a future video just because I really like them. They have tons of character and clearly show a designer let loose on the challenge of something small. The set of them reminded me of the enemies you might find in a Soulsborne game. You know, a knight, a goblin, a wizard of some form and some horrific pot monster. Feels very mystical and fun. More designs like this please. They're really enjoyable. I know Warhammer Fantasy was full of these kind of designs and the character, and despite them coming back in the old world, I never showed much interest in them the first time round, but it would be nice to see GW continue to provide a space for the more fun aspects of the fantasy genre. These offshoot games apparently do this in spades, so again we'll have to give them a look at some point. Again, these models just have so much character and fun to them. The Chaos Space Marine breeds murderous intent and anger. The small little guys ooze with character, and the Chaos Sorcerer is just so commanding in their pose. They're a neat little bunch of models for Warhammer Plus. So right now we're moving to priming. I have this case for my tripod from Peak Design. I love Peak Design stuff, but this is such an over-engineered waste of money. It's a box with an elastic lid that contained another container that contained the tripod. If anyone's interested, the photographer James Popsis has a video on YouTube where he unboxes this and talks about how stupid it is, but never mind. I like to place models for priming on solid bases that keep things together. This provides an excellent stand for this. It's heavy enough that the models or paint will not move it. Its squarish footprint means it won't roll over and thus can be handled easily while painting. Just using some sticky back plastic tape to hold the models in place will do. There's no need to go overboard, and this stuff can actually provide more grip than traditional blue tack or other systems. I've typically found that blue tack over primed bases, so if you have a base that's been primed multiple times, sometimes that blue tack can come off. I've never had that issue with this, and it will also not obscure the bases like the GW priming handles do, meaning a full coverage of the primer as well. So I'm in my garage now. And yeah, it's a mess. I make no apology for this. I have hobbies to do, not garages to clean. I first lay down some cardboard to protect the furniture below. It's not actually my cupboard, it's my landlord's. Even if it was mine, I would want to protect it in a similar manner. I find these cardboard sheets from computers or Amazon orders or the like an excellent cover for things while doing stuff like this. I don't know why I decided to demo shaking the can, but here's roughly 2 minutes of me pacing and putting my mask on. So when I used to do this years ago, which I used to do it with my grandfather, he would always recommend a small test spray to check that it was relatively consistent in the coat. And then you can see that I'm doing small sprays from about 20 to 40 centimeters away. This is the idea. So first we check that the primer's working properly, and then we make sure not to overdo it. So here's the primed models. I had some technical difficulties with this shot, so the prime does not look as matte as the end product does, which you can see in the next shot as I'm setting up my painting table. I keep hearing about techniques like slap chop, so I want to use these models in such a way that we could immediately test a color scheme using this style of painting, but I would also at some point like to test that style of painting using contrast and things like that. So I'm sort of preparing for that at this stage. I will be talking about these brushes more in another episode, but I did treat myself to some nicer ones. One of these is a small dry brush, so I thought I would give it a go. We can see the base coverage is good, so we need a palette as these paints are from droppers, and a bit of towel to get the paint out the bristles. In some place I was willing to overbrush a little as well, as I wanted this to be close to a base, especially for the small models. This really brought out the texture of these models that we're using, revealed a lot of the details with only one pass. It's nice to see this process. I know in a few places there are bristle lines. This is a first pass of a dry brush, so it's just revealing texture. It's the later stages that will ignite the contrast we're after. I followed up with a milder dry brush of a white. This colour was dry brushed solely from above to reveal areas that light would naturally hit. Thus I focused on upper areas and brushed from above where possible. By using the contour of the brushes in a downward stroke, it can also emulate a light effect in a nice and subdued way, so it's an alternate method of doing the same thing. For the larger models, I focused on the places the light would fall on naturally. So for the wizard character, there's things like the thighs and the cape would be included, even though they're further down the model. The finished effect looks ready for painting and paint testing, just as I wanted. But to be honest, at this juncture, I was way too in love with these small guys. So I'm going to do something completely different with them. I'll hang on to Tabitha and Bob, but these small guys, yeah, they're going to be my slap chop contrast experiment pieces, I think. You'll see these guys soon in a future video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and as always, keep safe out there.